Right, we are live again for episode 3 of MarksWood 35. Hello, everybody. How are you doing today, Joseph?
Doing good. I have lighting.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I can actually make out your name and your website now.
I know it's not like I'm broadcasting from a cave,
Yeah, it's great.
so that's nice.
Yeah. All right, so today we got quite a few good topics to cover. So we're going to start with HDR. It's a big topic in the photographic industry. A lot of people hate it. A lot of people love it, and we'll just discuss some reasons why. So I'll hand it over to you, and we'll let you talk about. Do you like HDR? Do you shoot it? What's your views on it?
I do. You kind of got me hooked on HDR. The first time I think I heard about HDR was when Apple added it to the iPhone, and I think it was Phil Schiller on stage explained HDR, and I was like, "Well, that's kind of cool." How it takes an underexposed photo, an overexposed photo, and then a regular photo, and then combines the three of them for the best possible photo. And I thought that just sounded incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, theirs just did it real quick within the software, but then once you showed me how to do bracketing, which I had no idea what bracketing was. I always heard people talk about bracketing. Does it have bracketing? Does it have bracketing? I'm like, I don't know if my camera has bracketing or not. I don't even know what it is. And so once we figured out what that was, being able to set up bracketing, and very tricky to do without a tripod, as I do.
Yeah,
it's good. I like it a lot. I think it's good. It's definitely some people overuse it quite a bit and give it that major like quote HDR look to it. Yeah. But I'm a fan. I think it's cool. I think if you're gonna set up a shot to get a lot of good colors, it's a great way to get all the colors. I think it's the same as like if you were to put a polarizing filter on your lens, or put an ND filter on there, you're augmenting your camera in a way to get the picture that you want to get.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the biggest thing is people think that because of like what you just said, the HDR look, people think that HDR is making your photos look ugly, like this over-processed, gross, grainy. But really, the HDR is nothing more than the act of taking multiple exposures and mixing them together to get a properly exposed photo. It's not crazy colors or using a software. It's just taking multiple photos, bracketed exposures, and mixing them together. And so, yeah, like you said, what I hear the biggest complainers of HDR is so funny to watch them say stuff like, oh, well, that's not real photography because it's, you're spending too much time in technology and software and ruining. And so what's so funny to me is these are the people that are in studios and do these ancient Olin Mills style pictures where they have all these strobes going left and right, and they're using artificial lighting as well. So they're using artificial lighting as their source. And so in my opinion, that would be like cheating, right? And so all we're doing is taking multiple exposures of natural light and just bringing in the natural light into a software and kind of putting the best parts of that light into one photo.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about trying to get the photo that you want to get. There are people that overexpose photos because they like the way that looks. There are people that underexpose it because they like the way it looks. I mean, unless you're shooting through the lens without changing anything at all, then every little thing you do is going to be done to kind of manipulate your photo just a little bit, whether you change the aperture to get a better depth of field or you're changing the ISO to get a brighter shot. You're trying to get that perfect shot that you want to get, and HDR can allow you to get that shot with, like when I try and get a sunset, you take that picture, you always do this when you take your iPhone and you're like driving home, hopefully not in the car, or whatever, and you see the sunset and you're like, oh, that looks awesome. You take a picture and it's like incredibly disappointing because it doesn't look anything like what your eyes are seeing at that time. That's sort of what HDR allows you to do. It allows you to take your time, set up your shot, get all the different levels, bright, dark, everything, combine them, and it actually kind of looks like what it looks like in your head. So.
Right. So yeah. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and if there's anyone out there that doesn't know what HDR is, it stands for high dynamic range photography. And so what that basically means, like you said, the human eye can see all different kinds of light. We can see the darkest shadows and the brightest highlights, and our eyes can equalize that into a beautiful scene. But like you said, when you take sunsets with your iPhone, typically if you focus on the sunset, you just get this small ball of light, which is the sun, and then like everything else is black and dark. There's no detail. But then if you try to focus your iPhone on like the shadowy foreground, then the sun just becomes this big blotchy ball of, blown highlights. And so, yeah, HDR is just, is mixing all of the dynamic range of light into that scene into a perfectly exposed one photo. So that's basically what HDR is. It's nothing more than that. So so how do you feel about? So I know you're shooting HDR now. Does your Sony camera have like an HDR mode where it does the work for you in camera?
I think it has one, but I don't like. I mean, Sony does a lot of automatic things really well. Their JPEGs are really good, and their noise reduction is pretty good. But I don't want to. When people do, I mean, HDR can be like an art, in the way that you want to get certain colors here and there, and that's a part of the fun is post processing to, because sometimes when you do HDR, the sky just looks ridiculous, and there's so much noise in the sky, so you don't want to do HDR to that part, and so you kind of wash that part out or whatever. So, but I've not tried it if it has it. I'm sure it does because it has, I think, several, because it's more of a prosumer camera instead of a full consumer or a professional camera. So yeah. I have no idea because I've never tried it. I just do the manual bracketing.
Yeah, that's one thing that that I think confuses a lot of people too. When people talk about shooting HDR, they're like, "Man, I got to shoot HDR because these photos look like incredibly detailed and the color pops." And so they look through their camera and they find the HDR mode, and they're not getting the results they want. And so, right, so bracketing is so anyone that's out there that's watching with a camera that wants to know, how to actually merge HDRs manually. Most cameras these days have like an AEB function in the camera, which is auto exposure bracketing. And that actually takes the separate shots for you and allows you to merge them back in some kind of software of your choice. If you do choose to use Aurora HDR, you will probably spend 1 day per photo. But
yeah,
that's probably a different
JPEG and, under 4 megapixels if you want to be able to process those photos within a day. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what is your preferred software right now? Do you blend them manually, or are you using Aurora, or what do you use?
I'm using Aurora simply because I have it, and it does give me some control. It's pretty good. I find that it's pretty good with certain scenes, and then some scenes I think Photomatix was way better at. You can get some good results, I think, from Aurora, but it does just take forever. Yeah. And I feel like maybe it produces at times a little bit more noise than what Photomatix would, but that may just be me. But yeah, that's what I use so far. I've tried using, Lightroom's just pointless. Photoshop's not too bad, but at the end of the day, it's almost as good as just going into Photoshop and just stacking them and aligning them, and then just playing around with it there.
Yeah. So we explained basically what HDR is. So why do you think there's this big cult on the internet that hates HDR so much? Like, it almost seems like they're threatened by it.
Trey Ratcliffe.
Yes.
People just don't like him for some reason. The dude, I don't know why. He's literally just like a little nerd from Texas that just likes taking photos and just started taking photos when he was like 35. So it's not like he's been doing this for a long time. And I think people are upset that he only started when he was 35 and he's like the most well-known photographer in the world.
Right.
But I think, I don't know, he's just polarizing for some reason. He's the one that kind of, there are others before him doing HDR, but he really kind of made it. He's the first that sort of, I think what he says, unapologetically processes his photos. Yeah. And he's the first one to kind of say it's okay to do that, in a time when people are obsessed with 500px style photos that are, these uber clear macro shots, that are just saturated. And, right. He kind of started doing HDR and they looked crazy, but people love them. And, I've posted some HDR photos where I work and they've gone bonkers. People love them. And I think anything that's super popular like that, people just won't like it in general. So. Yeah, but I think he was really what sort of, for some reason, just made people hate HDR for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, you bring up a good point. Yeah, he started very late in life, and I guess a lot of people that work so hard at it are just kind of jealous. I guess the jealousy comes out, and they're just like, man, there's no way this guy can be better than me. I've been working my entire life for this. And he's been on news networks, and he's J.J. Abrams has bought his gallery prints and stuff. He's everywhere.
So. One of the only photos in the Smithsonian or something like that.
Oh yeah. He has, I think it's the only digital photo.
Yeah.
In the Smith. So yeah. So he's gotten all these prestigious awards, and he's I mean, I personally like him. I think he's very good at what he does. I think he's a very humble guy. He never seems to boast about his success. He just
did a TED talk.
Yeah, I mean, people kind of made him famous. He didn't really, if you listen to his story, like no one really, he never tried to be famous. He says it, and really, it's funny if you go to his blog now, you'll see that his mom still comments every single day on every single one of his pictures. And he said he originally created the blog just for like family to come and see his work, and then people just found him and it blew up. So it's pretty cool.
I think just people look at the HDR and they'll just be like, "That's not what it looked like when you were there." The sunset wasn't really that color, or, it didn't really look like that. And so people kind of are like, that's not real photography if you're, artificially making something look like what it doesn't look like. But rarely will you ever find any photo online that hasn't been artificially touched up, even in a minor way, in some way.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's like all the wedding photos, or, where they always go into Lightroom and just change the color tone, or to gold, and then they'll like color in the gold sky, and they'd be like, "Oh wow, it's just so pretty that day." And you're like, "No, it was nice, but it wasn't gold. The sun didn't shine."
Right.
Yeah. So it's just another way of doing it, and and it really does. I think there are times when I do take an HDR of a sunset, and I take a normal photo, and it doesn't quite look like how I'm really seeing it, and then you take the HDR and you combine them, and it actually looks sort of like what you see. You get that rich, orange sky that was there, or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that I mean, just HDR as a whole is one of the most popular types of photography now for people, because I think it's one of the quickest ways for people to get the results they want, because again, it's made it easier to make your photos look like the way you saw it. So I think it's growing in popularity to a lot of people that are just starting out. And because of that, I guess it's making a lot more people that weren't so into photography before get into photography. And so there's just a lot of people kind of disgruntled about, all these newbies coming into the industry. And I mean, who cares? There's so many people that have this like secret sauce, to their career. And they think that they have like this one editing trick that, is kind of like holding their photography career together. And you can't think like that. If you think like that, like you have this one secret, then, I think that's like the quickest way to set yourself up for failure. You should never stop learning as a photographer. You should always be trying new things and taking risks. And that's the way Steve Jobs did it. And look at him, man. So.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of poker, when there was the poker boom of like 2002, 2003, when all of a sudden Texas Hold'em poker got huge. The World Series of Poker, like the big one, had like 123 people, and then once it exploded, then there was like 2,300 people playing, and then the original pros that were there were no longer going to the final table because they were getting beat out by these like amateur guys that started playing on the computer.
Yeah.
Photography is more accessible now, so you're seeing people that are just doing really good things now. But there are some people that abuse HDR, I think, and they're the ones that are kind of making a bad name. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. Just take photos that you like, and don't worry about everyone else. I mean, if you're doing this because you love it, like like Trey always talks about in his TED Talk, you do it because you love it. And he gives that story of Patrick Stewart when they went to go see him, and only 4 people showed up, and Patrick Stewart still did Shakespeare for them, and it's like he did it because he loves it. So don't worry about what other people are doing.
That's right. Yeah. I love that. I mean, it's true. If, nothing that you love should ever be a popularity contest type thing. It should, just, if it's your passion, you're going to do it every single day, and you're going to try hard, and you're going to take risks because you want to take risks and you want to keep learning and doing things. I mean, I've been doing photography for 13 years now, and I learn something new like every week, because there's always going to be new cameras and new features and new software. And so I never just want to like, I mean, and really that's the fun of it for me. I never ever want photography to reach a point where it just like comes to a dead stop and technology stops and camera stop. And, it's fun when new features and new companies try new things. It's great.
I agree.
Yeah. So anything else on HDR before we head to the next topic?
Avoid Aurora HDR.
Yeah. As much as we love Trey Radcliffe, that software, Aurora HDR, that he did.
If you're a person who is impatient, don't get Aurora HDR. If you're fine with waiting for long periods of time like me, then it will be fine for you. But it's not a bad piece of software. It's just not great.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have a lot of photos to go through, then yeah, it's not definitely not for you. If you're that kind of person that just does, a couple of HDRs every week or so, that's fine. But yeah, man, Aurora takes so long to process the photo, and then once it's in there, it takes forever to. It doesn't give you real time changes. Like if you just try to zoom in on the photo, all of your edits completely go away, and it just processes for like 5 seconds, and then they come back, and then
not all of their software. I think I was playing with some of their software today. Tonality does that. Noiseless does that. I think Intensify is the only one that really doesn't do that.
Okay.
Or if it does it really fast. But yeah, it's Aurora is just it's slow. But well, what other kind of software is out there if somebody wants to do HDR? So there's Aurora that we've talked about.
Yeah, there's Aurora. There's the other big one is Photomatics, and that was the biggest one, or I would still say is one of the biggest before Aurora HDR came out, and that's just because MacFun is better at marketing. But I still think that Photomatics is really, really good.
Photomatics, I think Aurora and MacFun, their software looks really good. If you look at a screenshot, you're like, man, that looks really good. And it did, for the most part, it does. Photomatics looks like a Windows XP application,
It really does, yeah.
But it doesn't matter because it is really good and gives you the proper controls that you need. And like we said, it gives you real-time previews of your photos. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say this is kind of the funny thing, because I've used both now. I've used Aurora, HDR, and Photomatics. And so the funniest thing is that when you're in Photomatics and it's processing the photo and it's doing everything, it adds this like really grainy, pixelated look to your photo. Now you get a real-time view of what's going on, but it makes it look really compressed. But then when you apply all the settings and it finishes the photo, it looks unbelievable. There's like not one artifact, not one bit of noise. I love that. But about Aurora HDR, it's kind of the opposite. It looks, really good when you're adding the edits, but then when you're done, I always find that it adds so much noise in the clouds and in the shadows.
Yeah, it does. It's not very good with clouds. It's not so great with shadows. It's almost like they want you to use that and then throw it into Noiseless, the other app that they make. They're like, oh, here's a solution to your problem. We make this other app called Noiseless, but it's really good at making colors really pop. And so that if you have like sort of a darker scene with some really bright colors, like the demos that they show on their website, then it does look really good. I've had a couple that come out and look pretty good, but it's definitely like a 1.0 software. So
yeah, definitely waiting for some good updates to come.
So is there anything else so you can do? Photoshop has some HDR in it.
Yep. There's Photoshop and Lightroom now will do your HDR. And so Lightroom, just the biggest thing is with Lightroom,
Lightroom basically just like when I tried it the other day, and I think you even said this, it basically just throws away your underexposed and overexposed picture and just gives you your normally exposed picture. You're basically just editing the normally exposed photo, which defeats the whole purpose of HDR.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do it in Lightroom, it's basically the same as doing the HDR mode on your camera because it just does it all for you. You can't manually blend anything. And now with Photoshop, you can obviously, it brings you into their version of Lightroom, which is Camera Raw, and it'll give you all the extra light that's in these files, and you can crank up the shadows and bring down the highlights and do all that. And then you can take it back into Photoshop with the original raw files, the bracketed photos, and you can kind of merge them that way. So that Photoshop definitely gives you a lot more flexibility as far as that goes. So Photoshop and Photomatics are the most common, and then Aurora HDR is kind of coming up in the market as one of the most popular.
Yeah, and there's some software on the iPhone and not very much on Android, but there's some on iOS where if you just want to take some with your phone, or you can even take some photos that you've taken, throw it into the iPhone. I would not do RAW, though. I would do JPEGs. There is some HDR Pro. I forgot what the other software. There's a couple of HDR software that's obviously very minor, but you can do some of it on the iPhone if you really need to. Yeah,
that's very true. Yeah, there are a couple of really good ones. I can't really think of any. I know there are a couple of other pieces of software for Mac and PC that do HDR blending, but I can't really think of them because they're not. I've either looked into them and they were really bad, or they're just not popular enough. So I know the most common one across the whole industry is Photomatics. That's just the most common, and then Aurora HDR is on its way up there. But I really hope they fix their processing issues with some software updates.
Yeah. So if you were to rank them, would you say right now your favorite is Photomatics, then Photoshop, and then Aurora?
Yes, definitely.
Or Photomatics, Photoshop, the iPhone, Grab a Windows XP computer, find Photoshop 1.0, and then Aurora.
Probably, yes. That's probably more accurate. And now recently, so and now what I normally do, I never just stop with Photomatic. So I always do a Photomatic's rendition of the photo, and then sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 renditions of the photo in Photomatic. So this has been kind of a common thing with me lately, where I'll take like 3 or 5 exposures bracketed, and then I'll throw them into Photomatics, and I'll like love this one thing about the sky, but I hate what it does to everything else. So then I'll go ahead and export that just for the sky, and then I'll throw it back into Photomatics and do something for the foreground. And so then I have 2 Photomatics HDR blends, and I'll throw it back in with the 5 original raw files. And so I have seven layers in Photoshop that I'm just kind of painting through with my Wacom tablet.
So how long does this take you usually for one exposure?
Anywhere from, it can take as quick as like 20-25 minutes, but normally like an hour to an hour and a half per photo.
Gotcha.
Yeah, typically. And that's just because I'm a perfectionist.
Now, how long would it take you if you used Aurora?
Probably 4 days. If I were to guess, I would say probably somewhere around 3 or 4 days.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and now the reason, and again, I don't want to say it because I feel like when I say this, there's going to be so many people that might see this later and be like, "Oh my gosh, I edit my photos in 5 minutes." It doesn't matter. It's just because I am what the industry would call a pixel peeper. I'm that jerk that like zooms in at like 400% and makes sure I have no noise and no dust spots on my lens. And now the reason I do that is because I sell a lot of prints. So I don't want to overlook something and sell someone like a 20 by 30 print. They get it on their wall and they're like, "Oh wow, what is that big, glob of dust on the cloud there?" So, I don't want, I have to make sure I'm really, really tidy with, getting rid of all the little pixels and the noise that doesn't belong. So that's just the way I do it. Nobody else has to do it that way, but it normally takes me around an hour and a half or so.
We're all allowed to do things differently.
That's right. So, all right. So that's HDR software. Anything else with software? I'm trying to think. I wish. I'm sure we'll put in the show notes what the mobile apps are called, because I know there are a couple of good ones. But yeah, as far as PC goes, or PC and Mac, it's just Photomatics and Aurora HDR are the biggest.
Yeah, and Aurora's only on Mac, right?
Yeah, but Trey Ratcliffe and MacFun keep saying that it's right around the corner. It's going to be PC available.
Really?
Yep. They're saying that because there's been a lot of, I don't know why, I have no clue why, but all these PC people have been complaining and really wanting Aurora HDR. But when they finally get it, they're just going to be like, so we'll see. So yeah, apparently soon MacFun's going to release that compatible for PC. Yep. That will be cool to see. And hopefully with that, they'll release a big software update that will fix a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm sure they're constantly working on it, but
definitely, because like you said, the interface is beautiful. I love the way it's laid out. It's great.
Yeah, they got good sliders. I love that one slider that I forgot what it was, but Trey talked about a lot. It was like the one slider he really wanted to have, and I forgot what it was. It was like, wasn't it a slider that actually said HDR look or something? Yeah, it's something like that, and it's actually a pretty good one because it's not like a normal, like when you're editing on like a mobile app on your iPhone or Android, there's that HDR look thing, which basically just like destroys the image and adds so much noise. It's ridiculous. But his on the Aurora, it does something. I think I don't know what it does. Maybe raises the black point a little bit and then pops the colors a little bit because it's really good.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I definitely want. I mean, I want them to have the software update because I'm perfectly fine moving from Photomatics to Aurora HDR if it just gets faster and more efficient, because I love the layout and the interface. All of other MacFun stuff is really good. So
yeah, seems like you have to pretty much use JPEGs when you're using that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. So
JPEGs.
I was about to say that brings us to our next topic.
You like that transition?
That was a very nice segue.
Yeah.
So yeah, next topic is RAW versus JPEG. Yet another big topic in the photo world. And what do you shoot mainly? Do you mainly shoot in RAW or JPEG?
I mainly shoot in RAW lately, since I've been doing a lot of I have to do a lot of editing on the fly usually on my iPad Pro or my iPhone usually, because now that the Lightning to SD card connector works for the iPhone, that's like the greatest thing in the world. Yeah. So if I'm out at an event at church or somewhere and I take a bunch of photos and I want to put some of those up there on Instagram or Facebook or something like that, using the Sony software to send the photo over to the iPhone is extremely slow. It works, but it's slow. And I think it brings over like a smaller version of the photo. Mm-hmm. So I think it's like a 5 megapixel version of the 24 megapixel photo you took or something like that. Because every time I bring it over there, I'm like, this is ugly. Yeah. And so I'll bring the photos, take the SD card out, pop it into my iPhone or my iPad Pro, whichever one I have with me, and I'll just throw it in and start doing some light editing on like Visco or Snapseed. And then I'll throw it into Facebook, Instagram. So lately I've been doing JPEG because the iPhone and iPad don't really have true RAW editing. And so this just makes the process go 1,000 times faster. And I've been very impressed with Sony's JPEGs that I've been producing because I've been taking some pictures in some fairly low light conditions, and it looks pretty good. And so lately I've been shooting JPEG. We'll see how long that sticks because I notice anytime I really do try and raise the shadows or anything like that, you immediately see some noise, whereas when you're shooting with RAW, you can pull that slider up a fairly good amount before you really see any noise. Yeah. But it depends on if I'm going to be editing on the fly, on the go, with my iPhone or my iPad, or if I'm going to be taking it home to put up whenever I need to, then I'll probably shoot RAW. So I'm a little bit half and half right now. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, that brings up a good point because I noticed that a lot of people that need, quick results, like I have a friend that I met a couple of years ago. I actually had him shoot a wedding with me. He got contracted, I think, last year to shoot the the Atlanta Falcons, the football team here, and he was instructed by the company that contracted him that he could only shoot JPEG at their games.
Really?
Yes, because so what he explained to me was the way they have it set up, all sports shooters apparently shoot JPEG like 99% of the time.
Well, I guess that makes sense.
The way they have it set up is that they have a runner, is what he said. So they have this guy or girl that will run back and forth up the line on these photographers, I guess per company, whatever company is hiring, 4 or 5 photographers there, there'll be this runner that says, okay, have you shot through your 32 gig card yet? Because, these sports guys will fire off 10, 12, 14 frames a second constantly. So they're, pushing out cards. So apparently they hand the card to this runner. The runner will bring it back to these other people that are sitting at computers. They pop the JPEGs in. They have this preset where they just add like a little bit of contrast, a little bit of saturation, and then they publish them so that there's this like real-time feed. And so that way they can get them out so these magazines and these newspapers can choose, the best photos. So because it's JPEG, they don't have to, wait for the raw photos to load and to read the metadata and everything. They just crank these JPEGs out left and right. So I think it's what I've seen is that anyone that needs like this, like you said, like editing on the fly for church event photography or, quick turnaround, people should shoot JPEG because it's very quick and snappy files to work with, and most cameras produce really good JPEGs these days.
Yeah, they do. Now explain real quick for those that may not know, what is the difference between RAW and JPEG to the 3 people?
So think about this. So a RAW photograph is kind of like an already baked cake. A JPEG, I'm getting mixed up. A JPEG photograph is like an already baked cake, ready to be served. All the ingredients have already been thrown together, and the masterpiece is ready to be served and eaten. So you can't really change anything. But a RAW photograph is kind of like giving you all the ingredients to this cake, and you can, make the cake the way you want to. So basically, it gives you all the ability to put that photo back in software, and you can mess with the light and the colors a lot more without ruining the pixels of the photograph. So it just basically gives you all of the data in the scene. It gives you all the color and all the power to make the decisions later if something is messed up like lighting or color. But JPEG kind of locks most of that in for you. You can still edit JPEGs, but it just doesn't turn out as right as a RAW. You can kind of ruin the color and kind of artifact and make your photo a little grainy, and it's just they're very different the way they
RAW
react.
Files are much larger than JPEG.
They are that too, yeah. So they also take up a lot of room, and especially if you're shooting anything like 20 megapixels and higher, you'll notice a big size difference.
Yeah, so those will fill up your hard drive very, very quickly if you're just pulling in and shooting a bunch of raws. And so, yeah, that's when you need like your little setup where you've got like 8,000 terabytes or whatever you got. Like
Yeah,
and
yeah, I have this contract with the Pentagon where they just let me use some of their servers, and yeah.
You run archive.org at your house.
Exactly. It works out quite well. So, well, yeah, and I'm shooting on 36 megapixel raw files.
Yeah.
And each picture, I think, is around 70 megabytes.
That's insane. Yeah, I think mine are, I have a 24 megapixel Sony a6000, and I think it's around 30 to 40, I think.
Mm-hmm. And that's for raw?
That's for raw. Yeah, JPEG for, I don't know. I haven't looked at my JPEGs, but I think they're probably around like 10 to 12 or something like that. Yeah. So if somebody was just starting out, would they want to do raw or JPEG?
So that's a good question, because I was just doing a whole course on how to master your camera on my website for beginners, and I was just trying to think of how to spill that to people. And so I think the decision is theirs, because I'm not going to tell them whether they should or shouldn't, but I think they need to be aware that if you're going to shoot raw, it definitely adds an extra step into your workflow, because in this world of being able to snap an iPhone picture and crank it right out to Facebook and Instagram and all these places, it's not like that with a raw photo. You can't just dump it on your computer and then upload it to Facebook. You have to bring it into a software that can read that type of file. So you have to have something like Photoshop or Lightroom or Aperture. Does Photos and the Photos app on Apple, does that read raw files?
It does read raw files. It actually makes, from what I understand, I think it makes a JPEG version as well.
Okay.
When you're using, like when I use the DxO plugin that I bought for photos, you have to right click on the photo and say edit the raw version of this photo. And then it pulls out the raw and you can just edit that and it makes a separate photo. So
okay, very cool. So yeah, so basically I think it's based on that information. Everyone would have to make their own decision. In my opinion, I think everyone should always shoot raw unless you're doing something like you said that's like a quick turnaround where you need to just get them on the computer and get them up. But I would personally have a problem seeing someone pay, $2,000 or however much for this awesome camera, and then they're not getting the best image quality they can out of it. So it's kind of like, limiting the abilities of their camera, because a raw file will give you all of that image quality, all of the megapixels, every single bit of color and light that you can play with. So I think they just need to know that you have to have a software that can read the raw files first, and then you can, export it as a JPEG or whatever kind of photo you want. And then from there, you can go to your social media outlets and all that.
Yeah. So if you're shooting raw, you're giving yourself a job later.
Right.
If you just want to take photos and post them, like if you're just doing this for family, or if you just if you prefer to just go out and take photos and that's the part you love and you just want to post them, you can shoot JPEG and that's fine. If you're somebody who loves post-processing, like you and I often do,
yes,
then RAW is definitely what you want. But there are some pros that just shoot exclusively in JPEG, though, aren't there? I know the only one that comes to my mind is Gary Fong.
Yes,
who's another polarizing person for some odd reason. But he shoots only in JPEG, right?
Yeah, he does. And I watched, and he's obsessed with Sony. He gets I think he said in one of his videos, he gets like free cameras sent to him all the time from any manufacturer he wants, but he chooses to go with Sony. And so that should say something to people that want to shoot JPEG, that obviously he thinks Sony's JPEGs look pretty darn good if he shoots purely Sony.
Yeah, I've mainly shot Sony, and I don't really have much to compare it to, because when I use my Nikon, I rarely shot in JPEG. But Sony's JPEGs. I mean, I noticed when I was recently editing some JPEGs I shot this past weekend, you definitely need to meter your photos properly when you're shooting JPEG, because if you underexpose or overexpose it, you can't really do a whole lot of fixing afterwards without adding a bunch of noise to your photos. So you definitely need to make sure that if you're shooting JPEGs, you need to make sure all your settings are correct.
Right. Which that goes back to the whole cake analogy, the ingredients, and you can't. I mean, once the cake is baked, you can't take it apart and mess with it later. So, I mean, I had that cake analogy all prepared, and then I screwed it up, and I said it was raw. So,
well,
but I think people get the drift. So. So basically, there is, the topic is RAW versus JPEG, but it's really just, what you prefer to shoot at certain times. I think I think you put it really well when you said, if you just like taking photos and you don't really want to mess with software and all this crazy technology stuff, then just shoot in JPEG, come back and put them right online and you'll be good to go. But if you definitely want to get the maximum image quality out of your camera, shoot RAW, take the extra time and kind of touch the photo up and make it look like the best you remember the scene, and then you'll be good to go. And you will notice, and this is something I've noticed too, that people will say, man, I would never shoot in RAW because those photos look terrible. But it makes RAW, shooting in RAW makes your photo look really bad at first. It flattens everything out. It takes the contrast and the sharpness and all the stuff that gets added to a JPEG, and it just takes everything out. It just makes it the flattest, most unflattering image ever so that you can add all that back in later.
It's sort of like looking at the code of a website. When you just look at all the HTML and CSS that's there, you're like, this makes no sense. This is so stupid. And then when you press like publish or whatever you're using, and then you're like, oh wow, this is like a really nice looking website. That's sort of what a RAW is. Because I remember in a lot of times when you're reading reviews for pictures, they'll compare the RAW and the JPEG, and they're like, wow, this RAW takes really bad pictures. And there's some like, no, it really doesn't. You just got to publish the code, or you just got to go in and you got to fix a couple things so that it looks the way you want it to look, and then process it, and then it throws it into JPEG, and will often look better than what they do for JPEG. So
yes, definitely. So I think that, from what you said and from what Gary Fong says, a lot of people, it seems that Sony takes really good JPEGs. I'll tell you as a Nikon shooter that Nikons do not take very good JPEG photos.
Really?
There's always a white balance issue. And so you can change that later, but again, it's harder to do that with a JPEG. It seems like every time I shoot in JPEG, there's this like slight green cast on the photo. It biases everything towards the greens, and I don't really get that. But when I shoot RAW, it's just flat, and I can do whatever I want. So again, white balance isn't a huge issue. That's kind of the color tone of the image, which you can change in most softwares everywhere. But still, it's kind of annoying that I have to do that on every photo. So I shoot in RAW pretty much all the time.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yep. So anything else on JPEG and RAW before you want to move to the next topic?
I don't think so.
All right. So then what topic are we doing next on these cameras? I know you added all these cameras you wanted to talk about.
Yes, and hopefully we'll try and every week go through whatever new cameras that have come out that have people are talking about. So let's go Fuji X70. Okay.
So again, I told you before the show that when you told me about this, I didn't even know that it existed until I looked it up, and so this is a pretty new camera. So what do you think about it?
I think it's great. I mean, it's one of those things that it's got a fixed lens on there, and it's basically like a mini version of their X100, and it's a little bit cheaper. I don't know if maybe the build quality is not the same or something like that, but it's APS-C sensor. It's like you said, 16 megapixel, which apparently they never really go over. And the native ISO is quite low. It looks like from what I'm reading here, it goes up to 6400 native ISO.
Oh, okay.
Not super great, but like you said, they have really good noise reduction anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty cool.
Yeah, Fuji's another one where I've heard their JPEGs are also really, really good.
Yeah.
And so what's catching my eye here about the Fuji X70 is that it looks like the fixed lens is a 28 millimeter equivalent. That's kind of an odd yet cool fixed lens.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at right here, 2.8. It looks like it says it's a Fujinon 18.5 millimeter, which provides a wider 28 millimeter equivalent. So I guess that's just because it's a crop sensor.
Exactly. Yeah. So the equivalent, I guess, is for 35 millimeter bodies,
which makes sense. So
so I like that because most fixed lens cameras you see are 35 or a 50. If it's a full frame. And so the 28 I think is kind of refreshing because I think with 28 instead of something like 24 or 35, that's kind of a perfect medium to where you can get kind of wide shots, and you can also get a little closer and get your street portraits.
That might also possibly be why maybe it's a little cheaper than X100, because that that lens style might not be the most popular for them.
Yeah.
Because most people are going to want, maybe if they're doing street photography or, you know, family or portraits, something like that, they're going to want something that's going to get a little bit closer to the person.
Right.
So that might be why. But yeah, for people that want to get a little bit of a wider view, which I probably would like now that I've been shooting with a 50 millimeter on my crop sensor, which is really like an 85 millimeter. I'm wanting something a lot smaller than the 50, like a 35 or 28 equivalent. So
yeah.
So that would actually be pretty cool. 2.8 is pretty good. And of course, Fuji's styles are, their cameras always look awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
What were you saying about, you said they like to never go over 16 megapixel.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed. I've been watching Fuji ever since they released the Fuji X Pro 1 years ago. I think that was in 2012. And so then they released the XT1 and so on. And I've noticed that every new iteration of their cameras, it's always a 16 megapixel sensor. And I've looked up as to why they've never, I mean, obviously they're not going to get into the megapixel war because they're a crop sensor, more of a kind of a street photographer's camera. They don't really need a 50 megapixel, but it looks like the reason they're sticking at this 16.3 APS-C sensor is because they've mastered the noise reduction on it. It seems like they give really, really good low light. A lot of people will argue that it's some of the best low light that comes out of an APS-C size sensor. So, hey, you know, more power to them. If they've mastered the 16 megapixel sensor, why not keep putting it out until they can get something better?
That would be killer. And this does not look like it has a EVF.
Oh,
I didn't check, but I'm looking at the pictures.
No, yeah, it doesn't.
So there's another where their cost reduction comes in.
Yeah, but I do notice that I think this is one of the first Fujis to do that, the fully articulating screen that goes all the way up.
Flippy screen.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's pretty handy.
Yeah, because they're kind of taking that from the Sony RX100 where the screen goes all the way up into kind of like a selfie mode.
Yeah, sort of like my 5R had that.
Yeah, that's actually...
That's pretty cool.
Especially with the, I'm looking to hear the video does 1080 at 60 frames per second, so people could even use this as kind of a vlog camera if they wanted to.
Yeah, I've never seen from what I've heard, their video is not the best in the world.
Yeah.
Which is okay because, I mean, if you're going to be getting a video camera anyway, then you're probably not going to be getting a Fuji for that or this kind of camera. If you're getting this kind of camera, you're getting it for taking photos, and it'll just be nice that it takes videos. So, yeah, it's not a real big deal. But moving on to something that does have probably good video, Sony's RX1R2.
Yeah. This thing just looks crazy.
This is one of my dream cameras. It's 42 megapixel, full frame, 32 millimeter f2 lens. This is unbelievable.
So I'm assuming that they took the sensor from the Sony A7R II and dropped it into this guy.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. This would be, I would love to see a shootout between this and the new Leica Q.
Yeah, definitely.
But this is, because the Leica Q is just a little bit more than this as far as cost goes. Because this is about 3,300-ish. And I think the Leica Q was about 4,000, right?
Yeah, I think it was like 4,200. Yeah.
So it's about 1,000 more, but which is not bad for Leica. Normally it's like $10,000 more.
Exactly.
But this is like one of my dream cameras.
Yeah, I mean it's
one camera to rule them all for people that just want to go out and just take some photos and not bring a bunch of gear with them, and you know, one camera that always takes good photos at family events and things like that. Yeah, this would be just incredible.
So then you're one of those people that can justify $3,298 and not have the ability to switch lenses.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It's always cool to meet because I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could spend that much money and not be able to change lenses. It's a killer camera. The specs are unbelievable. Now, if it was the Leica Q, I probably could because it's a Leica. But again, I think Leica is kind of sort of made its name out of just brand loyalty and just because the Leica names. I mean, this is still a killer camera. It's 42 megapixels. I just still don't know. I just don't know if I could buy a fixed lens camera for that much money. I don't know. But the specs look killer. It's even got the 399 focus points, which is unbelievable.
Yes, I would love I've never had a fixed lens like that, so I don't know if I really would be happy with it. I think if I had something like that, I would probably get a backup camera like an RX 100 maybe, or not a 100, an RX 10.
Yeah.
That's a zoom that has like a pretty good aperture and a 1-inch. I like it at APS-C, but a 1-inch sensor would be fine for me for something like that. But otherwise, what I find is I mainly just shoot with my 50mm like 90% of the time.
Okay, so here's a question then. So if you had the money, but just that amount of money, like for your photo budget, and you just have $3,298, not a penny more, would you spend it on this camera?
Plus tax?
No, just, I mean, plus tax. Sure. If you had like the exact amount of money for the camera in your photo budget, so yes, technically it was disposable for photography, would you spend it on that, or would you get like another killer camera with like 3 or 4 lenses?
That's tough. Depends on what I'm doing. If I want to, like, I'd probably get this. But because the K1 would probably be a pretty good.
Yeah, the Pentax.
Yeah, the new Pentax. So as cheap as it is, you could get that in like at least 2 killer lenses.
Yeah, definitely.
That'd be cool, but I've never used it before, so I don't know. I'm sure it's great for a full frame, but I don't know. I think I probably would get this, and but I would have to find out if I like it or not. If I'm like, gosh, you know what? I really want to zoom a little bit, or I do need a wider frame.
Yeah.
So I would probably get this and maybe end up selling it, but I don't know. Hopefully not. But I think I would probably just get this and love it.
Yeah. I mean, but
it's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that would do that. So yeah, I mean, it's got the same 399 focus points from the A7R2. It literally does look like they took that sensor and dropped it in this little camera.
It is insane.
It is. It looks really cool. The only part that I don't know if I could go with if I were to spend this amount of money was the EVF. It just looks so small for someone with wearing glasses and stuff. I don't know if I could press it close enough to my eye to where it blocks out the sun or surrounding light.
Yeah, I could use it. I've used the A6000 EVF, and it's not incredibly large. It might be the same EVF that's on the A6000 for all we know, or something like that.
Okay.
So I'd be fine with it because I've used my NEX5R had no EVF. It just had the screen, so I got used to that. So I could probably deal with that.
Okay.
Wouldn't be too big of an issue for me as long as it was like a high resolution one, because I had had one that probably wasn't that good. Or no, it was the screen on the what was it, the stupid Canon SX50HS, whatever that was. That was like the lowest resolution screen I've ever had, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was horrible. So no, I might be able to do this. What about the next camera here that we were talking about earlier this week, the Pen F?
Pen F, yeah, by Olympus. So that just looks like
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it just looks like a weird camera. I mean, because I just don't know if I would like it, or if it, I mean, for the price, it's not bad for what you get. So it's a 20 megapixel sensor. It's a micro 4/3 sensor, so it's not quite as big as APS-C. It's got a killer 2.36 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder. Oh wow, this one has, I did not know this. This one has the 5-axis in-body stabilization.
Yes, that's what I was saying. It has it in there, so that's pretty.
Yeah, that's pretty killer, especially for the price.
Yeah. So that allows it. I was reading somewhere, I forgot how many stops down it allows it to go or something, but yeah, that alone might be worth it. I would just like to see the light in these. I've never seen a lot of 4/3 sensor cameras. I've never used them, but I've always seen that when I've done the comparisons, it always seems that Sony's APS-C NEX lines or A6000 lines or whatever are better in low light than them. And I do a little low light since I shoot indoors during events and things like that. So, but this is a sexy camera.
Yeah,
I mean, this has that old school. I mean, if you didn't tell someone, if they didn't look at the back and see the screen, if you're looking at it from the front, this looks like an old camera.
Yeah.
With that black grip, silver, aluminum body. I mean, it's a good looking camera with the killer.
It definitely has that cool, like, nostalgic feel. I think a lot of people are going to buy it for that. And again, what caught my eye was I think it was last week's episode where I was talking about Olympus having that like weird high res shot mode.
Yeah, 50 megapixel high res mode.
50 megapixel high res mode. And so what that does, it basically takes the sensor and it shifts it left and right and up and down, and it takes 4 pictures, and then it combines them right there in the camera and gives you a 50 megapixel one photo still. So I'd be really curious to actually like put that side by side with one of their just like a regular photo from the camera and actually see how it, you know, stacks up again. I mean, if I can really zoom at 2:1 and 3:1 and see the extra detail.
Yeah, I would assume this would have to be taken on landscapes, because if you were doing an event, you probably couldn't do that. I'm assuming it's sort of like a panoramic where you kind of have to have something sitting still. So, but that would be killer. 4K video.
Really, this has 4K.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. It's a nice camera. I mean, so the question is, would you spend $1,200 on a body for a 4/3 sensor?
Right. That is a very good question.
You wouldn't, because you've got full frames. So
I mean, I probably wouldn't, but then again, I find myself longing for, because I was on mirrorless for a while, and I still every once in a while find myself longing for just that small camera that I can throw in the messenger bag and go out and shoot, instead of have to take my big hefty DSLR and the big lenses. So I'm still kind of on the hunt for just you know, one little camera that I can just throw in the bag and go shoot with. And this might be it. Who knows?
It is nice. Olympus apparently has a lot of lenses for their 4/3 line, so they've got tons of really good, well-priced lenses. So that's something I almost, for a while, I almost went with an EPL5. That has, to me, one of the ugliest bodies I've ever seen. It was like red or like this yellow tan color with this awkward grip. It just looks weird. But yeah, Olympus seems to be killing the 4/3 line. It's like they're just like going with it, and they're just making the best 4/3 cameras they can make. And there's some reviews I read that people said this is as good or better than any APS-C camera they've ever used. So I mean, they pretty much hit the check mark on every like future-proof feature that you want: 5-axis, 4K, you know, high res, 50 megapixel. I mean, they've got pretty much everything in here. But
and I was looking up some of the specs as well, and it looks like this is kind of crazy for this size camera. It does 10 frames per second shooting.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, if you're wanting this as like a you know, kind of a walk around camera for the family at like a vacation or something, 10 frames per second can keep up with running children pretty darn good, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So that's that might be a option. Now, right now, the only other like really good leader in micro 4/3 cameras is Panasonic, and they're more so leading the video side of things. So I think it's smart of Olympus to kind of take control over the photo aspect, because they know that people right now are going for Panasonic for video. So people might go towards Olympus for micro 4/3 photo.
Yeah. There's the GX8 is one that looks pretty good too. I don't think the PinF has 4K video.
Okay, it doesn't. That's what I was wondering.
It has 4K time lapse.
Oh, okay. So 8, because 4K is just 8 megapixels, so it's just 8 megapixel stills time lapse. Okay.
So it does 4K time lapse, which is what I read at first. Yeah, there are definitely some. The GH4 is nice. Panasonic, they made that one fixed lens that I almost bought. That was, I believe, a 4/3 sensor, the LX100. Yeah. There's a lot of people getting into this game. There seems to be a lot of good stuff going on in the 4/3. I've just never used a 4/3. I've never really wanted to use anything below an APS-C sensor, really. Mm-hmm. But there are definitely some cameras that would definitely sway my mind, possibly. And the PinF is pretty hot.
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty killer. I want to, see more videos online to where I can get an actual idea of the size, because I don't really know how big it is. I want to know, how small it'll fit in the hand, or if it's kind of the size of like a A6000 or something. I just don't know how big or small it is.
I think there was a website. I think it's called Camera Size. Yeah, camerasize.com.
Oh, okay, cool.
I've been there. It's like you literally go to this website and you can either pull out they have like a hand that's just laying there like this. And you can choose two, there's like two hands, and you can choose cameras, and it puts the cameras proportionally next to each other. And then you can even put like a penny or something like that next to it, so you can get a good idea for how big. Camerasize.com.
That's pretty smart. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, well that's cool. I'll do that then. So then we've talked about the RX1R Mark II, the Fuji X70, the Olympus Pen F. So out of those, your favorite is the RX1R. That's the one that you would buy if you could, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I do like the Pen F, but if I had a choice for the RX1R2, that's one of my dream cameras.
Yeah, I think out of those, I would surprisingly, I would probably choose the Fuji, the X70.
Oh,
and the reason is because I really like Fuji lenses. They're doing a lot of new Fujinon lenses recently, and I don't know, about a year ago, they released a 56 millimeter f1.2.
Wow, that's a specific lens.
Yes, it is. But ever since they released that lens, every photo that comes from that lens, no matter what Fuji body, it just looks unbelievable. The bokeh looks amazing. It's so sharp at f1.2. It looks like the Fuji's, to me, just look like the perfect street camera. So the RX1R is amazing. I think for price and for just a walk around camera, I'd probably go with the Fuji.
Yeah, their prices are good.
Yeah, so it looks pretty killer. And I love their lenses. Fuji lenses are amazing. And again, I think it does just as good of a job as the Sony JPEGs. I think the JPEGs out of the Fujis are pretty killer.
That's good.
Yep. So, all right. So you would go with the Sony, I would go with the Fuji, and then the Olympus is kind of floating in space.
I'll take it. Throw it on.
All right. Cool. So any other camera news that you can think of right now?
Not really. I guess just our last little topic here, the Phantom 4.
Phantom 4. So they released this yesterday. This is the new drone on the market. So there's some things that I like about it, and there's some things that I don't like so much. So what are your like initial thoughts about it?
So I saw a video, I think it was on The Verge, where they met with DJI and played around with it, and it appears to be like, if you don't really know how to fly drones that well, you could fly this, because they had like an iPad, and they were just it was up in the air, and they were just tapping on parts like where they wanted it to fly forward, and so they'd like tap on the horizon and started going there, and then they would tap to the left of the horizon and it would start to fly that way, like with a natural transition. And so it looked like it had some pretty killer. And then it would they had one thing where it was kind of looking at them, and they would tap on them, and it would put a square around them, and they said it was scanning them in 3D, and then they could walk around anywhere, and it would just follow them around because it knows where they are. Now, granted, they were standing in an open field.
Yeah.
So, but apparently it's like, I'm looking at their website here, and it's their number one feature that they point out is avoid obstacles automatically.
Yes.
And then right underneath that, track moving subjects automatically using active track. So that's apparently like their two main, and then right underneath that, tap fly, lets you fly with a tap of a finger. So I think those are the three main features that they're really kind of showing off with this thing. And
so
it looks really cool. So
it looks great. The way they're marketing it is like the smartest camera in the air right now. It's they're definitely using technology to up the ante here. Now, I owned the DJI Phantom 3 Professional, which also shot in 4K. It had a lot of other smart features. It had the GPS feature where you could set waypoints and then return to home and all that stuff. But it didn't have. I love that they added the ability where you can follow subjects. That's awesome. And I guess they did that so that you can make it a steady speed for a really smooth flowing video.
And there was also did you hear about the Lily drone?
No, I didn't.
So this thing, the Lily drone, was announced last year. I remember it was either last year or the year before. I think it was early last year, maybe even late the year before that. The Lily drone was announced, and it was this drone that its main feature was to follow you. And so I remember when it came out, or when it was announced, my brother was hiking, I think the Pacific Crest Trail at the time. And I was like, dude, this would be so cool, because the Pacific Crest Trail, unlike the Appalachian Trail, has a lot of open areas. We're just walking in a field or, you know, something like that. And so it would be really cool to have that. And it got a lot of talk, but the Lily drone, I don't think it even released yet. So I think this is Phantom DJI kind of coming out and saying, well, we can do the same thing. It's not really that hard. And so they just threw it into the Phantom 4.
Definitely glad they did that. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I also noticed here that my Phantom 3 Professional drone, I believe the top speed on that one was around, I think, 35 miles an hour. And I noticed here it's now the top speed is 44.7. So they made it a good bit faster. And they also added 5 minutes to the flight time on the battery life, which 5 extra minutes in the air is actually really big for these things.
Yeah, because we have an Inspire 1 where I work, and that 30 minutes or whatever is gone before you even know it.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, oh yeah, absolutely. That'd be killer, because we had to buy a couple more batteries just to have, because it seems like it's 28 minutes, and sometimes it before you know it, it's really been like 15 to 20. And
I'm sure it fluctuates based on how you fly, the speed, the altitude, all that.
Well, and especially with the Inspire 1, it's pretty much like when it gets down to like 15, it's like, I'm coming home, and it would like fly back and land itself, and you couldn't fly it anyway. So really, you're not even getting 100% of the battery life, which makes sense because you don't want it to be flying and, you know, go from 1% to 0, and all of a sudden it just falls out of the sky, and, you know, a couple $1,000s is down the drain. So,
yeah. So it's funny because the Inspire is kind of the ultimate, you know, pro version, and now they have all of these options, which is awesome. For the Inspire, where you can change out the camera to a micro 4/3 interchangeable lens camera for the Inspire, which is awesome. But they don't allow you to do this for the Phantom. And I wish they would, because if you get the Inspire plus the camera system and lenses, you're looking at over $10,000, and that's just not practical to have a micro 4/3 sensor in the air for, you know, over 10 grand. So I did notice here on the Phantom 4 that they didn't really do much as far as the camera goes. They kept the same 12 megapixel sensor. The last one was a Sony Exmor sensor, so now they dropped a CMOS sensor in it. So they're claiming that gives better image quality. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I really wish they would have done a 1-inch sensor. That would be unbelievable.
Yeah, we're still, so with the drones, they're mainly right now, it's very clear their primary use is video. Yep. Which it does really well. But it seems like photography is an afterthought, which, you know, is fine. Because the video is definitely way more stunning than taking a photo up high. But yeah, it would be nice to see somebody strap a really, really nice camera in there, rather than just a really good video camera that can take photos. Because we've taken photos with our Inspire 1, and actually the photos haven't been that bad. They've looked fairly good depending on what conditions you're in. But yeah, it's definitely this one. I looked at the sensor size and I was like, ooh, that's
it's rough.
Sensor size. I mean, not very good.
Yep. So overall, I think they're moving in a really good direction. Their technology is getting better. It's getting easier and easier to fly. All these smart features now are going to make for really good and really smooth video. I think it's really smart that they finally allowed you to follow a subject, because again, that'll just make it so easy to say, you know, I want to follow that person on that trail. You touch and it goes, and then you have a great video shot without having to, you know, make sure you're on the controller. You make sure you're manually flying at the same speed and you're not slowing down, and you're, you know, another thing that I saw, which is kind of cool, is that on the return to home feature now, it can, like you said, it can avoid obstacles. So it has like a 30-foot radius where it'll know if there's a tree or like a mountain cliff or something, and it'll avoid that and, you know, find the quickest route home, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd like to see how, because, you know, at some point someone's going to like stress test that.
Yes.
Because all the the video I saw of The Verge, they were pretty much just flying over a building, you know, which is like, okay, cool, just go higher, you know? I mean, it's like that sensor doesn't have to do a whole lot of work there. The trick will be if you're hiking or if you're riding a bike, or if you're, you know, you're somebody who's following somebody who's riding a dirt bike or something like that, and you're going through the woods or something like that. It'll be interesting to see how far it will be able to actually go through the woods, or if it'll just kind of go left of the tree or go right of the tree or something like that. So yeah, I can't wait to see someone stress test this once they get their hands on it.
Yeah, I definitely want to see more videos. And the price is, they upped the price, which is kind of weird. From the when the Phantom 3 Professional first dropped, it was $12.59, and now this is $13.99. So I guess we'll see how that does. However, the Phantom 3 Professional just dropped to $9.99. So a lot of people might be going that route instead of getting the new guy in town, because it's a killer price now for that drone.
Yeah, this one probably just has, I guess, the more technology that they have in here allows them to up the price. And I think they found that so many people are buying the Phantom series that they're like, let's just put a little more technology into this one and up the price just a little bit. And I think it'll probably sell like hotcakes as far as I know. But it's possible that people could do it like what you said, and they'll just be like, gosh, $1,400 or $1,000 for something that's doesn't have all those fancy features, but pretty much has the same camera and same performance for the most part. So I think it comes down to, if you know how to fly a drone, Phantom 3. If you don't know how to fly a drone, Phantom 4.
Right. You took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, if you're experienced and you've bought DJI products for years, you're probably going to take advantage of the price drop of the 3. But it is cool that I think they're smart making this technology easier and easier to fly, because the FAA is constantly putting new restrictions because these things are dangerous.
Oh yeah.
And so making it easier to fly is always a good thing.
Yeah. Well, they're on the video with The Verge, and we'll try and link to the video in the show notes. Ben Popper was talking to the guys at DJI, and one of the guys at DJI even said, if people asked him what drone should I get at first, he said, well, get a cheap one so you can learn how to fly it. And then when you do that, go ahead and get the Phantom and then move up to the Inspire. And so now he's telling people, get the Phantom 4, because then you can learn how to do it from there. So I think that's a cool approach to it.
Yep. I definitely think they were smart for making it much easier to fly, for sure.
So would you want to get something like this?
The Phantom 4?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Contemplated, and you even owned the Phantom at one point.
Right. I owned the Phantom 3 Professional, and the reason I returned it was because I wasn't a fan of all the fuss that drones were causing everywhere, where people were getting fined and arrested and all this stuff. So I just didn't want to mess with it, because I looked up online, like the week that I got the drone, I looked up online the 4 most hiked parks that I go to around the area. Even a few up in North Georgia, where we both like to go hike a lot. And on their website, on this website with drones, it said that drones were off limits on all those places that I like to go hike. Yeah. So it's like, there was 2 parks by my house that I can go fly, and they're not really very attractive parks. They don't have a lot of pretty stuff. So all the places that I like to go and shoot with my photo camera, I can't fly a drone there. It's restricted.
Which is weird, because you think I think that obviously they just don't really know much about drones, and there's, they probably saw that one YouTube video of the guy who put a gun on a drone, and they go, I don't want that at my park.
Yeah, exactly.
But really, the people that are into drones now are the enthusiasts, who are probably going to be more responsible with drones. Once drones get bigger and more accessible, you're going to have more of the people that didn't really want to spend the money. Now they're cheaper, so they buy a drone, and maybe they're less responsible than the original early adopters, who are really just in it for the cool technology and to use it. So it stinks.
I know. Yeah. So I hate that places have taken it that far so fast, because it was so much fun just to fly, even if I wasn't doing it just for video. It was just fun. So I loved it. I had no problem with it. As far as a review goes, I give it 5 stars. It was great. But yeah, I didn't really want to have $1,250 wrapped up into something that I could only fly at 2 places by my house.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yep. So I'm hoping that changes sometime in the future, like you said, as these things get more and more introduced into the market. They're still fairly new. You see the ones that are $30, in Target, the little ones that people can fly in the house. I mean, they're getting bigger as a whole in general. You're getting these tiny drones and these more and more expensive drones, and so they're becoming more and more readily available. I'm hoping as that happens, people will be a little more lenient to letting you fly them at their property.
It's funny, because whenever we fly our drone, we have one for our church that we need for aerial shots for different things, and we'll go outside, and we have a pretty large campus. We have a couple lakes, and we'll go fly it, and sometimes we have a school at our church as well. And whenever you fly it, adults, the older people will kind of be like, ugh, they'll kind of like back away and be like, get that away from me. Kids love it. They're like, they know it's a camera. And so they'll all just start waving to it because they know they're on video. And so they just absolutely love it. They're not scared of the drone at all. They're just, they love it and they want to see the video later. And so yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
it's definitely weird how the fear of it has gotten so many things done and so many restrictions put in place so fast. So that's what turned me off at first. And it's not, it's not DJI's fault. It's none of these people. It's just the fear of the general public. So
I agree.
Yep. All right. So I think that was everything. Do you have any last minute stuff you want to touch on before we end the show?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you everyone for watching again, and we will catch you next week for another episode.
Peace.